Since Melissa is the oldest daughter, all the stocks and the $3.5 million inheritance go to my wife. My brother-in-law Derek said those words less than 3 hours after we buried my father. He actually tapped a spoon against his glass first, like he was about to make a wedding toast instead of claiming a dead man's estate. Every conversation in Dad's living room stopped. I was still wearing the black dress I'd worn to the cemetery. My father's funeral program was folded inside my purse, and I hadn't even managed to eat anything since morning. Derek stood beside my older sister, Melissa, with one arm around her shoulders. Then he looked directly at me. "There's no reason to make this complicated, Nadia. Melissa is the oldest. Everyone knows how these things work." I stared at my sister, waiting for her to say something. "Anything." Melissa lowered her eyes. Derek mistook her silence for permission. "You're grieving," he continued. "Let Melissa and me handle the lawyer. Investments aren't really your area anyway." That was when something inside me shifted. For 18 months, I had driven Dad to appointments, organized his paperwork, picked up prescriptions, and sat beside him when the nights became difficult. Derek had barely asked about any of that. But suddenly, he knew everything about Dad's $3.5 million. I set my glass down. "Have you actually read Dad's will?" Derek gave a short laugh. "I don't need to." A few relatives exchanged uncomfortable looks. He stepped closer. "Your father had 2 daughters. Melissa was born first. She's the oldest daughter. Who do you think comes first?" My stomach tightened, not because I believed him, but because of how confidently he said it. For one terrible second, I wondered whether Derek had seen something I hadn't. Dad had always been private about money. Even while I helped organize his investment statements, I never asked what he planned to leave either of us. Maybe Derek knew something. Maybe Melissa did. I looked at her again. "Did Dad tell you that?" Melissa opened her mouth. Derek answered for her. "He didn't have to." Then stopped speaking for my father. His smile disappeared. "Nadia, don't turn this into jealousy because your sister inherited more." The cruelty of that sentence landed harder than I expected. Dad's funeral flowers were still sitting around us. His coat was still hanging beside the front door. And Derek was already talking, as though the money belonged to him and Melissa. Then a voice came from behind us. Did I hear someone discussing Robert's estate? Everyone turned. Martin Hale, Dad's attorney of nearly 20 years, had just walked into the living room carrying his leather document case. Derek smiled immediately. Perfect timing. I almost warned him not to continue. Almost. Instead, Derek walked straight toward Martin. I was explaining to Nadia that since Melissa is Robert's oldest daughter, the stocks and the roughly $3.5 million inheritance should go to her. Nadia seems to think there's some confusion. Martin stopped. His eyes moved from Derek to Melissa, and finally to me. I knew that look. And suddenly, despite the funeral, despite the grief sitting like a stone in my chest, I couldn't stop it. I laughed. Martin tried to hold his expression for perhaps 2 seconds. Then he laughed too. Not loudly. Not cruelly. But enough that every person in that room heard it. Derek's face hardened. What exactly is so funny? Martin closed his document case. I looked at Melissa. She had gone completely still. Because Derek had repeated one phrase all afternoon, as though it guaranteed him $3.5 million. Oldest daughter. But there was something about my sister that her own husband clearly didn't know. And judging by Melissa's face, she had just realized exactly what was coming. By the time the last relatives began leaving, Derek wasn't smiling anymore. I was in Dad's study, collecting sympathy cards, when the door clicked shut behind me. Derek stood with his back against it. Why did you laugh? I placed the cards on Dad's desk. Move away from the door. Nadia. Derek. His jaw tightened. Martin laughed too. So either you two are playing some ridiculous game, or there's something you're not telling us. There's an estate meeting Monday. Martin can explain everything then. Derek stared at me, as if my refusal confirmed his suspicions. You're bluffing. I didn't answer. Melissa is 4 years older than you, he continued. Robert introduced her as his daughter for as long as I knew him. He did. So what exactly was funny? I looked at him. Dad loved Melissa. Derek waited. That's it. That's all you're getting from me. He suddenly crossed to Dad's desk and pulled open the top drawer. I stepped between him and it. What are you doing? Finding the paperwork. He reached toward another drawer. I pushed it closed. You don't have permission to search Dad's things. My wife is a beneficiary. That doesn't make you the executor. His expression changed. For years, I had been the one who avoided arguments. Derek knew it. Everyone did. If he pushed hard enough, I usually stepped aside just to keep the peace. Not tonight. This study is part of Dad's estate, I said. You don't remove anything, open anything, or search anything until Martin authorizes it. You're seriously ordering me out. Yes. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then Derek gave a humorless laugh. You're going to feel pretty stupid when that will gets read. Then you can enjoy Monday. I opened the door. Out. He stared at me before finally walking past. I closed the door behind him and turned the lock. That was when something on Dad's desk caught my attention. Or rather, something that asterisk wasn't there. 3 months earlier, Martin had delivered a thick sealed envelope to Dad. I remembered it because Dad had placed it inside the wooden organizer beside his computer and told me not to move it. The organizer was empty. I checked beneath several folders. Nothing. Then I remembered seeing Derek come out of this study before his little inheritance announcement. My pulse quickened. Had he actually found something? A minute later, someone knocked. Nadia. Melissa. I unlocked the door. She stood there alone, twisting her wedding ring. Derek says Dad promised me everything. I studied her face. When? She blinked. What? When did Dad promise you the stocks and $3.5 million? Melissa looked toward the hallway. I don't know. You do know. Derek said Dad made it clear. That isn't what I asked. Did Dad ever tell asterisk you that? Silence. And suddenly, Derek's confidence looked very different. He hadn't been repeating something Dad told Melissa. He was working from something else. I looked back at the empty organizer. Then I shut the study door, locked it, and photographed every document still on Dad's desk. Melissa watched me pull out my phone. Who are you calling? Martin. He answered on the third ring. Nadia. I need you to move the estate meeting. To when? I looked at Melissa. Tomorrow morning. At 9 the next morning, Derek walked into Martin Hale's conference room carrying a photocopied document like he had already won. Melissa followed him. I was seated across from Martin when Derek dropped the page onto the polished table. There, he said. Now maybe we can stop pretending I made this up. Martin adjusted his glasses and picked it up. I watched Derek rather than the paper. What is it? I asked. Proof. He pointed to a line halfway down the page. Melissa Lawson, $150,000. Derek leaned back. Robert named Melissa as a beneficiary, exactly like I said. Melissa stared at the amount. Martin calmly placed the page down. Yes, Melissa is named in Robert's estate plan. Derek immediately looked at me. For the first time since we arrived, he smiled. Thank you. He turned toward Melissa. I told you. Melissa's shoulders loosened, but Martin wasn't finished. Mr. Lawson, $150,000 is a specific bequest. Derek's smile faded. What does that mean? It means Robert specifically instructed that Melissa receive that amount. And the stocks. Separate. The rest of the money. Also separate. Derek leaned forward. Then who gets it? Martin opened the document case beside him. We're going through Robert's instructions in order. Why? Just tell us. Because unlike yesterday's announcement, this is an estate administration. We're going to deal with what Robert actually wrote. Derek's face reddened. He tapped the photocopy. There has to be another page. Melissa is his oldest daughter. If he left her $150,000 specifically, obviously the remaining investments must be hers too. Martin stopped turning pages. He looked up. Why do you keep saying that? Derek frowned. Saying what? Oldest daughter. Because she is. Martin glanced toward Melissa. Derek continued, his voice sharpening. Melissa was born 4 years before Nadia. Robert had 2 daughters. Melissa was the firstborn. I don't understand why everyone keeps acting like that statement is controversial. I looked at Melissa. She wasn't looking at Derek anymore. Her hands were clasped tightly beneath the table. Martin noticed too. Melissa, he said gently, have you ever explained the circumstances of your childhood to your husband? Derek turned toward her. What circumstances? Melissa swallowed. Martin. Derek stared at her. What is he talking about? She said nothing. Melissa. I suddenly understood. Derek hadn't merely misunderstood Dad's will. He didn't know something I had assumed my sister told him years ago. Martin closed the folder in front of him. This is something Melissa should explain herself. Derek's confidence vanished. He turned his chair toward her. Explain what? Melissa finally raised her eyes. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Derek, Dad wasn't my biological father. Derek stared at Melissa as if he hadn't heard her correctly. What? My biological father was someone else. Derek shook his head immediately. Okay, so what? Robert raised you. You called him Dad. He was my dad, Melissa said quietly. Exactly. Martin leaned forward. Emotionally, absolutely. Legally, that distinction matters only insofar as Robert's estate documents define the beneficiaries. Your assumption about birth order never controlled anything. Derek looked between us. So Nadia gets more because she's biological. That is not what I said, Martin replied. Derek turned back to Melissa. Robert adopted you, right? Melissa's eyes dropped to the table. That silence answered him. You weren't adopted. No. I watched Derek's face change. The clue had been sitting in front of him for years. Before marrying Derek, Melissa had carried our mother's original surname. I had carried Carter, Dad's surname, from birth. Melissa's biological father disappeared before she turned 2. Mom met Dad when Melissa was 5. Dad helped raise her from then on. School events, birthdays, graduation, everything. He never treated her like an outsider. But the legal adoption everyone might have assumed happened never did. Martin opened another section of Dad's estate file. These records were included so Robert's intentions would be documented clearly. Melissa is identified as his stepdaughter. Nadia is his biological and legal daughter. Derek rubbed his forehead. Then suddenly he looked up. Wait. His confidence began returning. A will can leave money to anybody. Martin nodded. Correct. You don't have to be biological. You don't even have to be family. Also correct. Derek leaned forward. So none of this proves Melissa doesn't get the stocks. Martin gave him a measured look. Exactly. That single word silenced the room. Because Derek finally understood what Martin had been trying to tell him from the beginning. Being older proved nothing. Being biological proved nothing by itself. The only thing that mattered was what Dad had actually written. Martin reached into his case and removed the final signed estate document. Melissa wiped beneath one eye. I looked at her. She wasn't staring at the paperwork anymore. She was staring at Derek. You told everyone Dad promised me everything. Derek glanced at her. I was trying to protect your interests. By announcing it at his funeral. He didn't answer. Martin turned several pages. I'm going to read the provision governing the residual estate. This includes the remaining investment accounts and stock portfolio after debts, expenses, and specific bequests. Derek moved to the edge of his chair. Martin found the clause. His finger stopped beneath one line. This provision states that the remaining estate, currently valued at approximately $3.5 million. Derek suddenly reached across the table. Wait. Martin stopped. Derek's hand hovered over the document. And for the first time since Dad's funeral, there was fear in his voice.